we'll go ahead and get started, and Steve will be there in a second. All right, you guys ready to call the meeting to order? All right, let's go ahead and start with the Pledge of Allegiance. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. And then, so, were you guys okay with the minutes? Did you have a chance, everyone have a chance to look at them? I don't think we have all the copies of them this time, they're online. Any questions? Everybody good? All right. Do we have a motion?
Motion approved.
Do we have a second? Second? Okay. And then all in favor? Okay. And that's done, the attendance, and then we'll wait a second for council member Kay, and then we'll just talk. So this is kind of going to be our time to kind of have a discussion about what we kind of want to see with the report, with going forward, any other ideas that we've had a lot of information over the last 2 months. What kind of ideas has that generated? What do we want to see going forward? What recommendations would we want to see in the report? Any concerns that anyone has? So this is kind of our time to bring up, especially any kind of legislative ideas from any, policy-making body or perspective, or from the county's perspective. And let's go ahead and start with that. So what I handed out is, we met, Janice and Paul and Delegate Kerr and I met, and we were kind of brainstorming just to get us some topics of conversation, kind of summarizing all of the things that we've talked about over the last few meetings. And so just to kind of give us, so we have this handout printed out as just some ideas to get started. And the first one is that we were talking about was the EGRC funding and what kind of recommendations we would want to see as far as that. And I think first, does anyone have, or Janice, you want to go ahead and talk about where we kind of were?
Well, so when we had the meeting with just the 4 of us, we kind of came up with just a list, and then we decided we would do some further discussion of that list. So Paul and I met to talk about the EGRC funding just ourselves. And the more we talked about the EGRC funding, the more complicated it got. So we really, I would say that we ended that meeting after about an hour's discussion, and we ended that meeting with we would recommend that the IAC consider studying the issue further. And there's a couple reasons for that. First of all, the IAC is an independent body, and the legislation clearly says that it's the IAC themselves that adopt the regulations for implementing that EGRC program. So that was the first thing. And then the second thing is that there was some conversation here that you would change it from the jurisdictions that get the access portables, which is 250 portables at this point, that you might incentivize, by the way that it's currently being run, that it would incentivize those LEAs that are getting that funding to stay above that 250 portable limit, when the intent of the legislation was to drop the number of portables that we were having around the state. And so there had been some discussion about, would we change that number? How do you, maybe we only count the classroom spaces, and you don't count portables that are used for other building deficiencies like storage or other things, Well, again, the more we talked about it, the more we were like, but, to our knowledge, the IAC isn't collecting data for what portables are used as classroom spaces versus what portables are used for office spaces or storage spaces, with that, it would really be up to the IAC to decide themselves if they need to change their collection or how their data is collected, and we just didn't feel comfortable going that way in terms of a recommendation. And then we also, you know, when the legislation first passed for the EGRC funding, it was 300 portables, and that was dropped a couple of years ago down to the 250. Is that the correct number? We wouldn't know that. So you can see like the numbers 1 through 5 were really like our thought processes. And, you know, when you get down to number 5 being that we're only talking about $40 million right now, $80 million in 2027, I believe it is. But in the scheme of projects and the cost of projects, when an elementary school is costing you somewhere around $50 million, like this amount of funding is not the be-all, end-all. I mean, yes, it will make a difference for the LEAs, the 7 or 8 LEAs that are getting that funding, but we're only talking about, like Montgomery County got $10 million last year. That is not going to drive their entire school construction project, their program. So the more we talked about it, the more we were like, maybe the IAC might want to consider making future changes, but I think it would be our recommendation to leave that up to the IAC to decide for themselves, like whether or not that is something that they want. Any questions?
No, the traffic gods were not with me tonight.
I heard it was bad.
It was bad.
As soon as the clocks change and it's dark outside.
Throws everything off. Does anyone have any concerns about that? Does anyone have any discussion around?
And we really only talked about the EGRC. We didn't do any of the other
topics? Yep. And Dr. Lebo, anything you would like to add on?
The only thing I would add to what Janice shared was the struggle around overall funding, and is it appropriate to further change the current guidelines around EGRC funding, because it might end up only exacerbating the problem, right? Because there isn't an endless pot. So with ongoing challenges with funding and the state's debt capacity problems, it doesn't appear that there's going to be a significantly larger pool of funding. And so is this the right time to recommend that change? Again, it's not to punt the work to the IAC, but they have the broader perspective on total impact, and thought, you know, certainly if Alex or Commissioner Danbury thought a work group might be better, I don't think we'd be opposed to that, and we certainly wouldn't mind participating, but thought it ought to be more centrally managed as opposed to a single LEA recommendation.
I mean, me personally, I think that money should go towards solving the problem. You know, are the classrooms a solution? If they're short-term, maybe. But if they're 20 years in the same spot, I don't think that problem was addressed. So I think that should be narrowed down and say, hey, I understand the use of it, but let's solve the problem. And if 40 million is not enough, maybe it should be funded higher to help those LEAs that have a true growth problem, not just because they're sitting on portables. I mean, I just have a fear that maybe some say, hey, we can pick up $7 million or $10 million. Let's leave these puppies right where they are. And that's my viewpoint.
Would that need to be, to make the recommendation that the IAC study it, would that need to come from the legislature to be, but because you guys are an independent body now, so how would that aspect work? Because I mean.
So if it came in legislation, the IAC absolutely would have to do something to study it, such as a work group. That's our typical mechanism. So we could do that. A commissioner could also simply propose by motion that the IAC,
Study it
on its own initiative, and that's always a possibility. One other thing to keep in mind is that EGRC is connected to the current affordable housing issue statewide, and my understanding is there are other folks in the legislature that are trying to work on the housing connected to schools challenge, and that if EGRC gets modified for that reason, right, then we've got two different things trying to modify EGRC, and it might conflict, or you might end up undoing the other's work, or the change might make it so that what you're trying to propose doesn't even need to be done anymore. It's really hard to say. I'm wondering whether maybe we got to see what shakes out in the next handful of months.
Right.
and then figure out what the next right step is, because the problem might get solved.
Okay.
I don't know. I'm just hearing things being connected to the housing issue, and
Is that the same group that's doing, I mean, are we
I think we have multiple groups out there
looking at the
talking about all
APFOs
kinds of
again
different
still
things.
too?
Yes, yes.
Okay. Yeah, because like I said, we've said this and I've said it in multiple forums, is that right now they're at cross purposes. If we're trying to build more affordable housing in certain areas where we already have a lot of growth, and especially in our county, then that puts the schools way behind of where they need to be because we already have capacity issues, especially in those areas. So,
If you're also just trying to meet that need, there should be
Yeah.
funding to help you meet that need.
right, exactly, because then it puts you guys in a really bad situation as well, as trying to fund the seats. As well as we've talked all about the renovation stuff. Okay, so maybe leave it in their recommendation for study because, and then possibly add to look at how we do deal with growing impact, something along those lines, as well with it. Is that? You guys have any thoughts? Because it impacts you, so. No?
We just kind of sit here and wait for it all to fall in place. I think, you know. No, I mean, that's.
This is your chance to speak up and have impact on it.
It sounds like there's an awful lot of pieces that could cross each other out or conflict, and maybe waiting a little bit is with a plan in place. I don't know.
Yeah, I think the one thing is we all hear from different voices. You hear from the parents and, you know, your administrators and stuff like that, and you hear from, you know, your supervisor, and Alex hears from all different LEAs, and, you know, so it's I think it's important for everyone to realize what the other's hearing, and maybe at that point, you know, a better solution can occur. You know what I mean?
I think what could be useful is if the work group's recommendation focuses on the problem and needs to be solved and doesn't necessarily say one specific solution is the one, but we want to see this problem solved, and then as the next few months play out, the solution set will mature, right? And it may be that something will bubble to the top, and you don't have to be advancing one specific or two specific solutions, but rather just have been behind the push to get a solution to the problem you've identified. And that might be the right thing, because then if nothing comes out of legislation, the IAC can consider looking at it then itself, potentially.
Okay.
Because we have that double edged sword, I guess. We're regulated by legislation, but then we also have the ability to make some recommendations
We'll make policy directly.
and policy. So, you know, we always are skirting around that little bit of
Okay.
issues. So that's.
Yeah, and I didn't specifically highlight number 4 because you could read it, but it's, so we considered putting like a number of years that you can get the EDRC funding before you wouldn't be eligible to get that anymore. And I'm talking about for excessive number of portables, not necessarily because of growth. So, you know, if you hit that 250 threshold and you're getting that, you know, how many years would it be reasonable to say you should be able to drop your number down below the 250 and you wouldn't get that anymore? So we talked about that, but we really couldn't come up with a timeline because, again, with the funding challenges at the state and only giving 4 projects a year LP last year, the problem becomes that the way that you solve the excessive number of portables is to make building improvements, whatever that improvement may be, an addition, a new building, whatever. But if you can't get the projects completed within that reason, I mean, let's face it, it takes a number of years to get a project to even bubble up to the surface. So you're like, what is that sweet spot? And we just couldn't really come up with that because until there's a better, more reliable funding source that we can move projects, then you're in essence punishing those LEAs that have those excessive numbers. And there may be very legitimate reasons why they have those excessive numbers. You know, I don't know enough about Montgomery or Prince George's or those larger counties, they get that because of their total number.
Well, then redistricting is another. Are they redistricting to try to solve that problem also?
Senator, did you have? No, you're good? Okay. Right now, Senator? Delegate?
Nothing for me.
Okay, all right. All right, so we will kind of put that in some kind of format for you guys to review at the next meeting and see what you think then. Okay. Did you guys, anything from council thoughts? No?
I missed the opening. Are we in the legislative?
We're in the legislative because, yeah, we had, yes, we'll go back to you. Yep. Yep.
Well, do you want to go back to one of the topics that we had talked about?
Yeah, we can move on to something, yeah, so we'll put that into, that will be the first one, yeah. Did you want to talk about?
Well, we did explore an idea that I think the lawyers have pretty much shot down, and that was the
Okay.
particularly for our South Frederick corridor area coming up, for when it's using the form-based code model where traditionally we segregate land by use or zoning. And therefore, land is zoned for residential, everything going on there is residential with school impact, et cetera. Whereas in form-based code, we go away from that model. And now within the same block of land, you have multiple uses. So you can have one structure that has retail and residential. And it's done because you recognize that there's a mutual reliance and dependence, that commercial, employment, residential, all are advantaged by being intermingled and in close proximity. So from there, the thought was, well, if that retail layer, if that employment layer within this, redevelopment scheme are advantaged by the presence of residential. Right now, we rely solely on residential for things like school impact fee. Why not levy some of that fee on those other uses within that? And I still think it's a good idea. The lawyers just say we probably can't do it.
Well, as we were looking at, there's like recent Supreme Court decisions about impact fees and things like that have come down, which were kind of interesting and how you have to justify.
And I'm still not convinced that there's not an argument to be made there. Just when you're starting off, we'd be starting off, kind of a little bit behind, because you need a rational nexus, and the rational nexus argument itself isn't quite the right terminology anymore. But you still need to be able to show a connection and a proportionality between the fee and the use. But this kind of development's different, and I think that argument and that history is all based more on the traditional, zoning versus this. So I don't know. It's probably a bit too much to strive for right now. I don't think I know staff planning staff was looking at this idea when I told them what I had heard from the council attorney, and they were a bit disappointed. I think they were still going to pursue it with some of the other attorneys. So we'll see if we get maybe any different answers. But I still don't think that's necessarily the right answer, but that's the answer.
I think that's a good point, especially as far as the mixed use piece of it, which we're going more and more toward. Every piece of, our committee has been to several redevelopment areas from Baltimore City all the way out to Cumberland, and all of them were focused on mixed use and as far as down the whole corridor. So I think it is a very interesting way to maybe change and start looking at things.
Now, the other thing that we talked about that could also be challenging to get through, so when we look at this from the top level perspective, there's always going to be two approaches. On the one hand, it's how do we gather the resources to build the schools, either at the local or state level. On the other hand is how do we manage the demand side? Right? And I had my legislation on moratorium. That wasn't a mechanism managing it. That didn't happen. What we talked about looked more at the municipal annexation process. So right now, municipalities annex And at the county level, where the responsibility comes in, as well as the state, for funding school construction, you know, we have very little, you know, say over that. We basically have a binary decision. You know, when the zoning is different in terms of the county zoning and the intended use by the municipality, you know, we can say yes or no to, oh gosh, what's the term? You know, just the immediate annexation. Express, yeah. And if we say no, then they have to wait 5 years.
And then they can do it.
And then they can, after that 5 years, they can proceed with the development and the rezoning and all that. Our challenge is that we still can't get school projects done in that amount of time. So what we talked about and played with some language on is, now the authority for doing this is in state code. It's not locally. Okay? But what we've contemplated is adding an additional kind of provision to the state code such that beyond the 5 years, if you cannot fail, if you fail an APFO-like school adequacy test, and there would probably be, you know, have to define that since it's not an APFO. The APFO doesn't apply to municipalities, right? But having failed that, you wait an additional 3 or 5 years would be the get. And this would be something that we could potentially pursue as a Frederick County only change to that municipal annexation authority. But again, it's, can we better manage the demand side? And we know that that's one of the biggest challenges right now. We have municipalities, particularly the city, that annex. We have little say over it,
Right.
but all the responsibility
Right.
for managing the school construction needs. Now, clearly, any, you know, initiative to kind of get into the autonomy of the municipalities, even a Frederick County only initiative, is going to get a lot of pushback. No question. But we're here to, you know, put down ideas,
Right.
not to kibosh them just because we don't think it's possible.
Right.
So I think this is something that we should consider for including.
President Young?
No, Steve summarized that pretty well. And it's the issue we're facing. We could say as a county, out here, it's next to one of the municipalities, they can annex it in. We said ask for express and do whatever you want right away, or if it's more residential and we don't have the capacity, just wait 5 years and we can start building. So it's been a huge issue, and primarily I'd say it's been more with Frederick City, Brunswick, and Newmarket have been the 3 primary ones that have contributed to growth in those areas. So.
New Brunswick feels they've been responsible. Questions can be raised, but I don't deny that Brunswick seems to have.
Well, I'm just saying they have been, you know, a large. You don't get Brunswick crossing development, and it's Brunswick City's tripled in size in the last 10, 15 years. So the capacity there is fine, but at some point it's not going to be.
Kier, is that one that we put through the library, or was that as far as the annexation? Or was that just the bonding authority one? I thought that was another one we put through.
I did the bonding authority and then the tax. I did annexation a while ago. I can put it up.
Okay. Yeah, so we were trying to find out some information on what like a bill like that would entail. You know, could it be a local bill? You know, is that something, because I do, I think it's a recommendation, you know, that I support you in that, and I think it should be a recommendation that goes in as well, because there's definitely been, and I think that's a fair, reasonable way to do it. It's not like you're saying absolutely no, but we need a little more time for school construction to catch up with the demands that are put in place, and we need, the state needs to be able to better plan for those, and if we suddenly, change course, or if that 5 years comes up and all of a sudden now it's rezoned and it's gonna really impact the schools in that area. Janice, any thoughts on something
Oh, I
like that?
supported a countywide APFO when we had a countywide APFO, and then we one sued by everybody.
So this is different.
It's a little different than that, we're trying other things.
Just saying.
And one thing I forgot to mention, it was an additional provision that came up in our discussions.
Yeah.
The notion that you write into it the ability for the municipality to avoid the additional time delay if they're able to contribute toward
I was wondering that.
Yeah.
city projects
Yes.
in one form or another. And maybe this is where, right now in the city development, you're not even getting a school site, right? But if the municipality then were incentivized to have their developer, provide the site, maybe provide something else, to go against the need, then that might then allow them to avoid that extra time. So I think that's a worthwhile piece to include in there too.
And then and maybe instead of making it like an APFO, maybe it more like a school adequacy test.
Yes.
Because it's mainly the schools that are the biggest concern for you guys.
All this would be focused on is just the
It
school.
would just be the schools, not as far as other infrastructure or anything like that. Okay.
I'm liking it.
Dr. Lebo, is there
Municipalities won't, but.
is there a definition that we could come up, like that would be like a school adequacy test? There's like legal type definitions that would fit that bill?
You do the same test as we
Okay.
do under the APFO effectively, it's just not the
Okay.
APFO itself.
Okay. From state law, could this be a local bill? Alex, do you think, have you seen anything?
I can't weigh in on that, I'm sorry.
No problem?
So the other way, and we haven't really talked about this, and I've been just trying to think, we've got the long-term issues and we have the short-term issues, and obviously, I don't think the state's gonna get to a point where they're gonna have the dollars to fund the construction needs that we have over, in the future, even if we had the money to build everything, the state's not gonna have that money, and so we have to wait about other either temporary solutions, and I know the state is pretty prescriptive in what a school has to be and where things are at, but when we look at, we have our charter schools in Frederick County now that use commercial spaces, as to whether there could be something in law that when a system's overcrowded, you could look at alternative sites for temporary times until those buildings could be used, because they could be much more cost-effective to provide adequate indoor, safe classroom space without having to wait that the school's not going to be built for 8 or 10 or 15 or 20 years before those schools are there. But I know the issues always are what the state says has to be in a school and how it has to look. In this, we have, is it now 5 schools that are running charters for? 4 charters that are running, that are in facilities that we would not be approved by the state to put. Well, I don't even know if that would.
Well,
It's a Bellisville.
deferred maintenance,
Yeah,
but it
yeah,
was a
it's
school.
an older building.
Yeah.
But yeah, 2 are in, or I guess 3 of them are in commercial spaces that were there.
Yep.
Well, they were more, they were not really necessarily warehouses, but they were intended more for office type settings, but they're being used effectively for schools. And again, and if we have areas and that's available, that would be an option that could be used that's not on a traditional school site.
Is that something that that Councilmember Carter's and Alderwoman Nash's work group is looking at?
They're looking more at the urban school site thing, which is coming up with unique buildings that would, what Councilmember McKay talked about, this new South Frederick that's a mix where you could have maybe even a building that has a school and has residential on top of it, or mixed or whatever.
Not just in that area, I think.
Not just in that area, but it could be anywhere. But yeah, if we had somehow had a downtown Frederick site, we could never put anything like a normal school building because you need the amount of acreage. So
They were already,
Sorry.
Yeah.
Finish. There's already conversations going on within Blueprint implementation groups about using that kind of approach for pre-K. Because we don't have enough facilities for pre-K. So certainly if we're looking at it for pre-K,
Should be all right for
that
middle
would set a
schools, yeah.
precedent.
Yeah.
So quickly on that, there's a lot more potential already enabled than I think you think there. First, the only standards you have to meet are the state's educational facilities sufficiency standards, which are not what one would design a brand new school to. It's actually what one would look at an existing older school for to say, hey, is it missing something egregious? So they're not that hard to meet in terms of leasing space. Second, any lease has to be approved by the state superintendent of education. But I haven't seen any denied recently. I don't know that there's a extremely high threshold or set of criteria for that, so it is happening, it's a possibility.
There is a public school system that is leasing that type of space for a public non-charter school.
So I don't remember exactly what type of space was being leased, but there are a couple leases out there here and there.
And are they using capital dollars for those leases or
So
operating
it's
dollars?
operating dollars to pay the annual lease
Right.
cost. However, the IAC did last year adopt a new policy that enables the IAC to put state capital dollars into improvements in a leased facility if the LEA is backing it and it's for 25-year lease or longer.
So that would fall in line where I'm.
No, that wouldn't help you with a short-term thing, but it could help you with a longer-term solution to a specific localized need for capacity in a neighborhood where there's not a site for a typical school, but there is a building that fits a school, has enough space, that's already an option. And so,
Or what
although there are a
if,
couple of, hurdles and approvals that might be needed, it's definitely something that could happen today. It wouldn't be new law required, it might not be quite as flexible as you might want, but it's there.
or if we're talking about just from an annexation standpoint, if you are talking about something that would have to be used to mitigate it or donate it, I mean, is there facilities that could be either donated or given to the schools for that use? Or if you have a development going in, would there be, maybe they couldn't afford to build a school per se, but they have this building or that building, and then they could use capital dollars to renovate something along those lines to make it fit a school? It just wouldn't be the normal, have to be an acre, have to be, the acreage and all that.
And we have looked at that for some of the specialized schools as an example. That's one of the things we've explored for CTC expansion, because that sort of lends itself to that model almost perfectly. And I think, and I will not speak for our charters, but I think one of the challenges that they would express, because they've expressed it to us, is the commercial space for, in particular, physical education offerings is their biggest challenge. And they really struggle in the commercial office space finding an adequate facility that meets those needs. But doesn't mean that there's not, so Monocacy Valley, I'll use as the exception to that rule. They had a unique parcel in that property that they bought that they're able to offer their physical education in a former commercial building. But there's, again, a very uniqueness to the TJ Drive location, right, where they've been able to segment some outdoor play area, and they had a high volume space in the center of the building, which is very abnormal for a commercial office space. So anyways, it can be done, but it's not, I don't know how prevalent the inventory is for a traditional school model, but we'll always open it to look at it. The only comment I would ask is that if language was wanted to be considered, and we can certainly work on languages that to have the board of education have sort of veto authority, for lack of a better term. And I hearken back to the previous language about school site acquisition in Frederick County, where we were put into a place where it was either basically take it or leave it, and we If it's,
Many times.
we're not opposed to using those spaces, but it really has to fit our need, not, hey, we're offering this and we're gonna move forward, and if you don't take this space and to deal with it.
This is how we're getting out of doing that. Yeah, okay.
So I think we can get there. I think the language that was tweaked with the land acquisition piece, it's something we could use to leverage the language for this.
Okay. Yeah, that sounds great. Does anyone else have any concerns about?
I do.
Yeah,
I'll play devil's advocate, because I
Uh-oh.
always do. So there was a point in time that Frederick County had over 200 schools. Just so that in case everybody doesn't know that, you want to chime in, and they're right, we had over 200 schools. That is not a cost-efficient model. So I will just point out that while, yes, I would say we should explore every option available, they have to have enough square footage to actually make it a cost-effective solution for the problem that we have. Having individual spaces that are only doing a few classrooms would not be.
Oh, no, yeah, because it's even the cost
Yeah,
of
but
it.
think about the number of square footage, like when we're talking about a high school, and that is our biggest challenge right now, we're talking about very large buildings, and I can't think of one in Frederick County that would fit the need that's available for lease.
Not where we need it.
Well, and we were just talking on the way in here about other counties in the state that are actually looking to do bigger schools because there's less long-term maintenance, because less roofs, less, things like that, so.
So I just say, keep that in mind, so keep that in mind.
But if they have veto authority.
And then the other thing to just think about is, again, while it's great that the IAC has money to go towards leased spaces, it still comes out of our allocation of money, which is insufficient to
Already to meet it, okay.
And somebody mentioned the word operating dollars, and we went,
Yeah.
which is also insufficient to meet
those
already. Yeah, to be taken care of it, okay. Again, these are ideas that we put, that nobody has to take up these ideas, but, they are ideas, or they're out there, or so at least everyone knows about it.
Well, one more for you. Sure. So, the excise tax. So right now, the excise tax in Frederick County was zeroed out by the last Board of County Commissioner. An excise tax is a tax on new development for public infrastructure. Now, if we try it, so first and foremost, to reinstitute an excise tax would require a reauthorization at the state level, because we zeroed it out when we did it. So that would require a state bill. Now, if we try to kind of focus an allocation of the tax on schools, we run into the same issue as with the impact fee, trying to apply an impact fee to non-residential. However, we can also recognize that an excise tax on all types of new development, which is what it would be, applied to even non-public infrastructure, is increasing our revenue stream, which increases our bonding ability, which we then can apply for more general purposes, including the schools. It is satisfying capital projects like roads and water and sewer that frees up funds that we can then use towards schools. So even if it's not a revenue stream dedicated towards schools, we can have a positive impact on our ability to fund more school construction.
Okay. Would you want that like going along with, because the other thing we talked about was the sales tax, or the penny on the sales tax, or similar to what Georgia was doing. So would you want to put both in there, and that would also be a local bill, I'm assuming?
I think what we want to do is we want to lay out the options.
Okay.
We recommend doing,
tax.
Nope, we usually do not recommend that.
Generally frowned on.
Generally frowned on,
At least with an excise tax, it's focused on new development,
yes.
which puts new strains on, our infrastructure requirements. Whereas a sales tax, you're applying it to everybody
Everyone.
now, across the board.
My question would be, would you take that tax and use that tax then to cover the state share? Because it's not doing anything to increase the state share of, like, funding for the project? Because we could do that now, like, and not take, you know what I'm saying? Like, I'm not saying.
I know what you're
yeah,
saying, and
yeah.
I'm not addressing it
Yeah.
in this notion right now.
Okay.
It's just about, and maybe by having more wherewithal, either through bond authority, because we can borrow more, because we have more revenue, we can make that choice more frequently. We're always going to, our harder limitation that we have less control over is coming down from the state.
Was that removed by the last Board of County Commissioners or the last council?
That
Okay.
Board of County Commissioners
Okay,
they actually set it at 0 in the code.
okay.
And according to the lawyer, we would have to be authorized at the state level,
Okay.
which means we could, tweak the language as well.
Senator?
No. No thought.
No thoughts, okay.
Why did they zero it out?
I think it was zeroed out,
They put in the mitigation.
yeah,
They put the mitigation fee in instead, yeah.
which is now gone.
Well, we're getting it for some, but yeah.
Yeah. It's gone and going away. That was the trade-off they made.
Okay.
I do have a question.
Of course.
So when they zeroed it out, were they not given some type of authority to do that in the first place from the state level? And then the county took it upon themselves to zero it out, which means that the authority would still lay for them
I kind
to.
of thought it would be still there, but according to the attorney, since it was zeroed out, and I don't know if it's a question that it was zeroed out and the length of time it was zeroed out ago.
You have to look at the idea of the original language of the legislation that said that gave the ultimate authority for adjusting up or down to the county.
I'm just telling you what the attorney.
Yeah, no,
and maybe
I'm just thinking.
legislature's attorney might.
Yeah, we could at least ask to figure that.
Think something about it.
They didn't do away with it, they just set the rate at 0, and so it's technically, theoretically still there.
Correct, that's what I'm saying.
Right.
Like, it hasn't been deleted off the
We
record.
could not just
It hasn't been deleted off the books. The enabling legislation was passed to allow you to do it, which would give you the authority to be able to fluctuate according, if I'm thinking of how most legislation would be written, it would give you the authority to fluctuate it.
Yeah, because it's not like,
that, I think it's that by setting it to 0, we gave up that authority. I think that was kind of the conclusion from the attorney.
That's what, been 10 years?
More.
yeah.
And that really was the intent at the time.
Well, we
Probably
can.
been about 13
Do you
years.
have
The
the,
intent was to,
Just have a,
no, I know that. Do you have it, the reference when you asked the lawyers, do you have the state code that was referenced? I mean, we can find it if
the
you can.
language.
No, I didn't ask for that. That's findable, and
Yeah, if
it's still there. Is it set by ordinance or in?
Because if it wasn't officially removed,
Who said that? Black?
No, this is Kate Keller, council attorney.
okay. I mean, that's certainly something we could find out if it's there, because you guys would also have to come to us. That's not something that we would generally just give the authority for. Usually someone comes and asks for that, like the county executive did, ask for some things as far as increasing tax limit, things like that, but it would normally be something that you would ask us to do, but certainly we can find out if it's still in.
My thought process must be similar to yours, because
Yeah.
if the legislative authority was already, of the enabling legislative was already granted, I find it difficult to believe unless, I mean, I don't know about you, Senator.
That was my starting point on this. It really was.
That would be, that ability to adjust up or down is left within the hands of the governing authority. I just thinking out loud, I just don't understand why we would, just because you set it to 0, because times were good and you didn't feel, or you doesn't seem like a reason that they would have to go and ask, like we would need to go and ask for enabling legislation, because the state does the enabling legislation and gives that authority, so really it would come, it's already there. We haven't changed that.
Sunset, but I can't.
Yeah, I mean, and I can't imagine there would be a sunset just because you set it to 0. I would be shocked if they put something in the language to say, okay, if you set it at 0 for 15 years, it goes away. That authority usually is in perpetuity.
Right.
I'll have a look.
Yeah. Well, yeah, if you get it to us, and then we'll send it into the library, and we'll get some answers from our offices. Yep.
We just don't want to be taking.
And I don't know if it's a question of how it was implemented by resolution or ordinance as opposed to
Okay.
written into code.
Okay.
Whether that is a factor here.
Okay.
Yeah, if you can find that legislation, I mean, it'll be easy to read and determine exactly the proper direction to continue.
Yeah, I don't even know when was that even enacted? I guess
Between 2010 and 2014.
No.
No, it would have been before that. But when it
General.
was taken out, yes.
When was it
It
No,
was
when it
reversed,
was-
it was repealed 2000.
And it was standing well before then.
Yeah.
Early 2000s.
Come on, give us the answer. You know everything else.
Come on.
I've tried to block that.
You just triggered something. I was in a meeting today, and in the Senate, there's going to be a limit on the number of bills we can submit. Question is, will there be a limit on the number of delegation bills? I didn't think to ask that question.
Good point.
You guys are limited now.
Yep.
What's the limit? I didn't get that.
Delegate.
Oh, is it?
Hippie bills, yeah, Hippie's got some room. How many?
15.
15?
It's gonna upset some people.
Well, there was some talk about 15 and
This
some
guy.
talk about 20, but if you pre-filed, you got a little bit more flexibility. So I think it might be 15 unless you pre-file, because that spreads it out a little bit more. But hey, there are a number of people in the Senate that do 35, 40.
What do they think we're still
There's
I
gonna be some really
know.
upset people on the other side of it.
You guys do like usually,
All.
don't you usually do like 25? Not you, but like, don't a lot of senators do over 20?
How many does Lamb do?
Lamb
Lamb
is
does
like
like
35, 40. My predecessor used to do.
What? You manage that.
So you guys, didn't
Similar.
your committee hear the most bills or something like that? Didn't your committee hear the most, you guys?
No, we did, we did.
Y'all-
Counted, yeah, we heard them all.
Yeah, I know we did in ours. Yeah, right, yeah, right. They're not capping in the House, are they?
Surprised if Feldman
Many ideas.
requested it.
That's gonna ruin our crossfiles, though.
I hope they cap it.
Yes, it is.
Yeah, it's gonna really impact crossfiles. Huh, interesting. All right, well, thank you for that. Okay, I think the other one of the other ones we talked about was, and I think this would also be legislation about increasing to at least match inflation or some kind of inflation tie. I don't think we have that. Do we have that listed out? No, but just some kind of, to keep up with the cost of construction,
The CPI?
something like that, yeah.
You get an annual cost of school construction index that's expressed as a percentage from one year to the next. And so to at least increase the total pot of available money to the IAC to keep up with that.
So you do get that, you said?
The IAC comes out with that every year.
And our
And
impact
based on,
fees are
based on
indexed against
actual
that every
bids
year.
around the state.
Thank you.
I think what she's saying there is the pot of available money be increased by that number, which is not now.
It's, the pot of money stays the same. It's not increased by the index.
So
They
increasing-
get the index,
increasing
but
what they're-
not any more money.
Increasing.
Yes,
So I did
Yes.
not, okay. So I did misunderstand, sorry.
okay. Can you and Dr. Lebo help with some language on that, or something we can put in for next week that we'll talk about that? Any questions about that?
I thought the pot of money increases every year by the increase in gambling revenue.
I think that was a sarcastic
I mean,
comment.
I was gonna say.
sports betting, come on.
Wishful thinking.
Black is going.
Yeah.
I thought pot.
Don't even mention iGaming. Oh, yeah. No, yeah. Yeah.
It's a lot lockbox with a hole in it.
Yeah.
Yeah. And then, let me see, we talked about the commercial authorities. What was the one about writing a letter from the counties? What was that one, Janice? Do you remember what that one?
So it's our understanding that the Stadium Authority has some available debt capacity. I don't have that quantified, but that we would basically be able to allocate that towards some more projects. So it's not necessarily creating a new built-to-learn kind of thing, it's just using that debt authority that's already there to apply to additional projects.
Okay.
I don't know how we're going to investigate that. It's probably going to involve a conversation with the Stadium Authority, which is certainly not in my pay grade. So,
Yeah. Okay.
yeah.
Okay. All right. Work with Stadium Authority. Okay. All right. We talked about annexation at the
Just wondering if that would go through government ops, but it doesn't because Stadium Authority doesn't follow procurement law.
They don't. They don't understand.
Yeah, it's totally separate from that. Somebody to ask my former delegate McIntosh, who's now on the Stadium Authority board.
Oh, okay.
Really?
Yeah.
Oh.
Okay.
She got that cush gig.
All right.
That's a pretty good assignment.
So if we come up with a letter, we can word it.
I don't know that we would be able to do that.
No, but if you guys can come up, we can do it, but if you guys can help us with whatever wording, however you want it to be worded.
Why don't we just reach out to them first to see if
Just
it's,
call
if it's a
first?
if it's plausible? Start crap. Is that fair or no?
Yeah, I don't feel qualified to write a letter to the Stadium Authority about their bonding capacity. You know what I'm saying? I really
No,
don't.
well, all right, that's fine.
Yeah, we just want to ask them.
I understand you have some room on your credit card.
What is your debt ceiling? Okay. All right. We got it. All right, next, where is the other? And then same thing with the bonding authority, we're working on that. And then the taxing authority. Can't set a special rate, okay. All right, oh, this was, I think this was Delegate Fair's bill. Do you remember, was it cross-filed?
Just looking for a cross.
For this one. So this was about setting special rates, that he was working on, and I think it went to some kind of interim study. So I was going to, he's on a call with us tomorrow, actually, so we can ask him, we can actually ask him about this in a call tomorrow. How's that sound? Okay.
I think he's still looking for cross.
He's still looking for a cross on that for this session? Okay.
Let me have a senator he can ask.
I don't know.
Weird.
That must be why he calls me. Interesting.
So this,
Starts to make sense.
so this is a proposal to set a special property tax rate for school construction purposes that is applicable to commercial or industrial.
Is that his?
That's
Yes.
the one.
That's what's written in here.
That's the language that he was looking at last year.
I kind of wonder if.
It's similar to-
That's the legislative review that I got the read on.
Right, it's,
Yeah.
when you first started talking, I thought you were actually referencing this bill.
Yep,
So it's very similar.
so that might,
He might face some headwinds on that.
yeah.
Might be a reason he's not getting a cross file.
Yeah, so, yeah, he went to a study with it. Were there any other legislative ideas, anything else anyone would like us to look into, talk about next time?
I guess will the report just reference the what we looked at in terms of
Consideration, yeah.
Yep, it'll be listed as either considerations or whichever, and then, because again, these are only just recommendations. And anything legislative that we want to put through, we could talk about if we agree, we could talk about bringing them to the delegation, if it would be a local bill, delegation bills, and
Yeah,
if there's something that
I think
we
that,
need to do.
maybe, like you said, we give options, and then it's not an exhaustive list, but it's an inclusive list of of ideas that we're trying to, think tank on and see what, if we can find, there might be a combination therein, so.
And we're just under a timeline, obviously.
Yeah, we're under the
We have an
crunch, so we
obvious
gotta, like, call the
timeline if we
stadium
want.
authority, like,
Yeah.
now.
Yeah, we're under an obvious timeline of if we want to try to do anything for this year to help you guys, so.
If you take something, there's only 4 of you, the delegation's 15 people, what's the chance of them accepting it?
The recommendations from us, I think they're gonna probably follow the recommendations of the group. I mean, I don't know that they would,
They're the ones that,
they're gonna defer to the,
this was a delegation bill to form the group.
If there's bipartisan support, I would think so.
Okay.
I mean, this is us reporting back with our findings, and then we determine if we can find like a solution therein. But support what we're designed to do.
Yeah, they're waiting to hear what we come up with. And then, like I said, it's, there are the other work groups even that are looking at doing different things. So there might be something that we actually come up, other delegations are coming up with similar recommendations as well. So that might.
I think we all know that the state has to have more funding for school construction. It's just not enough.
Well,
Right.
Plain and simple.
might be some
that
other
a
big
motion?
projects.
That raises another
Yeah.
issue. This next year is going to be a real challenge because, in fact, the meeting I mentioned I was involved in today, it was half the conversation. A lot of our funding the last couple of years has come from the federal government. And as the IRA funding sunsets, that's one of the key reasons, other than funding the blueprint, that we're in the situation we are today. However, going forward, we're already hearing that that the Trump administration is looking to cut $2 trillion in funding. So that's going to further affect the state
Especially the
budget.
blueprint, especially the blueprint.
Yeah.
Blueprint is-
Yeah.
Definitely probably
So,
further.
we may be having a whole different conversation about everything. The meeting closed today with, and I can't remember if it was the Senate President or Guy Gazzone, but either way, it was, we're going to be making some very, very difficult decisions this next session.
Means taxes.
Pardon me?
No, I was just like meaning taxes. Like consideration of tax raising. Those are gonna be the difficult ones, because that's where we're at with the deficit we're looking at. It's just not gonna be pretty. It's not gonna be pretty.
Either cut or
Well, I know, I'm,
revenue sources or a combination of the two.
Or
there's
cut,
gonna be some funding measures saved, but it's not gonna be enough when you look at some of the programs that probably won't receive federal funding.
Exactly.
So that'll be state money freed up. Hopefully, maybe. But we'll see.
and then, so any other ideas as far as, and is there any other groups or topics that you guys would like to consider, as far as idea generating or anything else you would like to see before we close out the work group?
Was something that was, I think, mentioned by Alex the last time we met about some former ideas that came forward from his group, and I remember asking, does that work like an infrastructure bank? And I forgot what that idea was.
Okay. Sure.
It wasn't in the meeting notes.
Okay, we have other, or we could go back. You were, Alex, do you remember, can you say that again, Senator?
You were sharing some results or recommendations from my past work group, and you were talking about, I forgot the name of the entity, but I said, does that work like an infrastructure bank? And you said, yes, that does. What was that?
Were you thinking about the revolving loan fund that had been established in statute by the General Assembly? It would have worked somewhat like an infrastructure bank, where a loan would go out to a project and would get paid back, and when you come back in, go out as a loan to another one, right? But that revolving loan fund was obliterated in a bill last year, and it's gone. So it's kind of a moot thing now.
What was the reason? Do you recall?
The number one reason, I think, was
The ability for the LEAs
yeah, it was not expected that the LEAs that really needed it could then pay it back later.
Okay.
Right? It would end up
They
being a
wouldn't.
grant program under the name of a loan program in the
Right.
end. Right, and then the second thing was there was a little bit of money in it, and that was desired for something else, and it got pulled.
I think the reason why it may have resonated with me was very early in our conversations, we were having conversations about public-private partnerships, and one of the reasons we backed off from that is that it would be such an expensive source of funding. So obviously, a revolving loan fund from the state might have a much more reasonable interest rate.
True. It was supposed to have been 0 interest.
Right.
That's reasonable.
Yes. Yeah, it was set up to work the way you're thinking and wanting it
Right.
to. It just isn't there anymore,
Okay,
unfortunately.
right.
Yeah.
And there's other versions of public-private partnerships other than P3s?
Yes, yes.
That we could just, make a recommendation to either keep exploring or keep
Yes.
looking at, because it's just kind of outside all of our scope of what we could do, but we can encourage.
Yeah, I've
And
heard
I know
of
the
one
county's
type-
always looking at it, and I know the school system definitely is always looking at it, but
I've heard of one type thrown out there that is possible that could be a P3 type of thing that does have some private financing, but with an interest cost cap up front that's very clear. And it's not much over municipal bond cost of money, that could be better than the typical P3 that's been done to date. More affordable, perhaps. So there are things out there that could be explored, for sure.
okay. So maybe that's one of the recommendations as well. Are there any other types of recommendations that you guys would want to see, not just from a legislative authority, but from some type of either creative problem solving or, using the resources of Frederick County? I'm cold. That's why I'm sitting like this. I'm chilly right now, so.
Warm in here.
It's not warm in here. Okay, and there's, there are a few things, as some of it's gonna be, school system having the flexibility to come up and use different ideas, like we talked about, the ag high school idea. That's gonna be up to you guys and having that flexibility and working with other partners, and then, like I said, whether that's University of Maryland system and, however that looks in the future. Those are like future conversations, but we've started some of the framework for those conversations. So however you need any of us to help, we're certainly available to do that. right, you know, going forward. You know, I think there's some pretty cool ideas, but they're gonna come down to funding, and nobody has the funding. University of Maryland system is not really gonna have the funding. So just keeping those ideas in mind as we move forward, you know, I think is important. Is there any, like, outside groups, is there any benefit talking to, like, the chamber, or, because I know, they were very interested in CTC, I know that, and supporting that role. I mean, that could just be a recommendation to continue to work with the chamber, as far, and other partners as far as the CTC.
We have a, the county executive formed a CTE, master planning group, and we're meeting now, and selecting a vendor to do that study, so.
Oh, okay.
That's coming.
Awesome.
And
And that's gonna be like the all-encompassing study?
including FCC, FCPS, chambers, involved in that, our workforce services people, it's a big study.
That's wonderful.
Because we really feel like we want to have, you know, a master plan, not only to meet the expectations of the blueprint, but to provide that, like, seamless pathway up through credentialing and all, you know, we just really need to take a 30,000-foot look. So we're not far enough along so I could tell you what the scope is, because we're still defining the scope. So, but that'll be coming, you'll hear about that in the next year or so, like, we're just to the point where we're interviewing vendors. And if, you know, if we don't find one, then we'll have to put out an RFP. So it just depends on how long that process takes, but we had an interview today with a vendor, so we'll see.
Well, I've been championing that all over every time I talk about it, just because I think it's such a great idea to look at it from more the holistic approach.
Well, the one thing that Frederick County has going on is we partner very well together. Everybody does. I mean, it's not just, you know, certain people, but we really do. And the fact that, you know, our higher ed and our K-12 and our chamber and our workforce services work so closely together all the time is a real benefit, because most of the vendors that we've talked to, that is not the case in other places. And they have to build those relationships first. We have those relationships, and we should certainly maximize them, because I think it's in everybody's best interest. So, but anyway, I just want to say, you know, from the county's standpoint, and I think the county executive, if she were here, she would say the same thing. We're not opposed to anything, and we don't necessarily need a recommendation, because we're always looking for new and innovative ways to maximize these dollars that we put towards school construction. And we do have a really great partnership with the school system and trying to work that out, and the state also, because we all try to work together to maximize the dollars the most efficient way that we can to just get projects done. We know we have a very lengthy list, and we're always going to have that lengthy list. You know, if we didn't forward fund, would we be able to get more done? No, because the state can't make that, you know, like, we have to do what we have to do to get the projects going. And we're certainly willing to do that and have been willing to do that. So although I want to come up with a list of recommendations, don't think that the recommendations, like, define the scope of the problem. Like, we're going to constantly look. And if we don't come up with a recommendation, but we think about it tomorrow or the next day or a year from now, we'll explore that as well.
Yep.
Because that's what we just do.
And I hope that the report encompasses that, because we're gonna start just like where we started. My idea was to kind of start where we started with the beginning of the work group, and pull all of that information for people to have, so you have the most comprehensive, up-to-date look at where we are in Frederick County right now, what needs to be met, and then, you know, here's some of our recommendations going forward. And that's kind of how I thought, and playing out, yes, is how well we've been responsible, not just for how we use the state dollars, but how we take care of our buildings in general. And I hope all of that, the pieces of that, will come out, and how we have tried to be innovative. You know, can we do more? Obviously, always, but and having those partnerships and the relationships are very important. So, is there any other thing that you guys would like to see as far as on the final report structure?
So going back to those top level themes of, on the one hand, it's how do we find more money to build? And then I mentioned, how do we manage demand? And the third one in the middle that I didn't mention is, how do we manage the cost, right? So thinking in terms of overall structure, I think that's probably a good way of structuring the recommendations under those three banners, right? Going back to the how we manage demand, and I'm going to put this out there, not to be controversial, not to be critical or something, but it is a reflection of what we see in the economy at large remains with us in terms of the transition from, working in a building to working remotely, and now it carries over in the school system in terms of the remote virtual program. So not just, and thinking of that as something to, not can we afford it, but how do we expand it? So that we now take some of that demand for capacity off the table. And maybe it doesn't move the needle. That's quite possible. But as something that allows us to manage the demand for new capacity, I think it's worth considering. And I think we need to be thinking about those things as well as just where do we put money.
I'm certainly not against looking at that. I think it's sort of like the charters. Unless it's Sibyllesville, where every one of those kids basically moved from Sibyllesville Elementary to Sibyllesville Environmental Charter School, you don't typically pull enough kids from any one school to reduce it by a teacher or need for a classroom. It's a kid here, maybe a couple. Now, it was a surprise to me that when we cut the remote virtual grades 3 through 5, those kids could go back to their home school, and it was only 60 kids. Is that right? I don't know if you have those numbers. Yeah, it was like 125 altogether, and maybe 65 in those grades. But besides their home schools, they gave them a list, and we just found out that Centerville was one of those that several of the kids went to. And because the principal, we're hearing from the parents how overcrowded they are. And so that was a surprise. So if that was the case, that would pull a little bit of a chunk, but it's still not like enough to really, where you could cut a staff member or not build as big a school. That's just not ever going to happen with the charters, or I think the remote virtual.
But there are options, even as we talk about the early college program. That also is something that pulls kids out of the school and sends them over to FCC. Or are there even the dual enrollment piece itself creates capacity in your buildings if you do it right, because those kids are only in those classes Tuesday, Thursday, or Monday, Wednesday. There is extra capacity that's created because they're not in the building as often, and they're not in the buildings on Fridays, right? You still have to have a seat for that, but how can we, moving forward, account for things like that? Or
Talking on campus.
or facilitate it, or make it on campus,
Well,
or
that's what I'm saying. You're talking about on-campus dual enrollment, not
early.
in the school dual enrollment.
Baltimore
Both.
County
Both.
had that. Baltimore County had that, where the kids would leave high school and go to Baltimore County community college.
I think it's,
But they
eliminate
eliminate
are still high school-based dual enrollment.
Right. They're high school-based dual enrollment, but if you either plan it or possibly do it well, there is ways to create the capacity because those kids are basically sharing a classroom.
But Paul, the dual enrollment that are in the school, they're not just going 2 days a week, are they? They're still going all 5 days.
It depends on what their schedule's like.
What the course is, but typically they're paired up, and so they're not just taking a single dual enrollment course, they're taking 2, and so it's the same time period, so they go every day, it's just
The
different
problem I would
courses.
see too is you can't plan that year to year.
Right, but like I said, there are ways we could possibly do it looking, forward, that is one of the things. Or you increase the early college going over to FCC, or doing more hybrid, doing more remote virtual.
Well, here's the other thing with that, is that they finally let us cut back on, and we only pay for 2 classes. It's one of the areas that's being looked at to save money that we might, so expansion right now is not the thing. It's actually being, the only way expansion is happening is with more students. Per student, we're cutting back on because we can't.
Right, but you still have, don't you still have the MOU that the parents would only pay a certain cost?
Free.
No, you don't.
Free.
If you're taking above the 2 credits, because the state law was the 2 credits in the fall, 2 credits in the, or 2 courses fall, 2 courses spring. But the parents, do you still have the MOU in place where they would pay the reduced rate? Or is that different now because of the state? That's what I don't, can you find that out
I
for
know
me?
Baltimore County, they cut all of that.
I think everybody in the state, I think the state where went to.
Yeah, they had to cut how many they could have.
Session on
Yeah,
that.
yeah, but that when we first were doing the dual enrollment, the only students that didn't have to pay were our farm kids, did not have to pay, and you could take, you know, whatever classes, so I just didn't know, once you reach that cap, what's the MOU, what's the payment?
I'm following up now, I'll get you an
Okay,
answer.
good.
All right, thank you. Did you have something?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Karen, I wanted to ask you, so when you had the remote virtual learning countywide, and then COVID ended, you bring everybody back in. I don't know how, I'm asking because I do not know. Was there an option or a consideration ever to see how many people would rather have continued with remote learning? Or was it not even considered, it was everybody's back into
No, we continued it.
classroom
We
learning?
did continue. We were hearing from, I have still an inbox of thousands of emails saying, stop this, stop this, stop this. But we got 1 or 5 that said, this has worked great for my child.
Sure.
And we continued it from COVID, so it was.
Yeah.
That's when it continued.
Okay.
And so they'll tell you that it wasn't COVID, it was totally COVID. I was on the board.
Yeah.
It was totally from COVID that we then started, not the high school, that's been 12 years. That was for kids that go to CTC,
Sure.
AFA that needed
Sure.
some credits.
Sure.
And now it's actually, they had their first graduate
Yeah.
from there.
Well, the younger kids, if they don't have a parent at home, obviously, that's an issue in and of itself.
Yes, it was a little disconcerting to learn that.
Yeah.
That's why 3rd grade and up. you
Sure.
know.
Okay, all right.
But it's, and that's a whole nother discussion, there's that would be a whole nother discussion for you, because right now it's currently for the 6 through 8. And then, but it's only for the 1 year, so we don't know if it's even gonna be budgeted, because you guys are just putting your budgets together now. So that's a whole nother, conversation. Yeah,
I do think that the conversation's likely to continue. I don't know that we could estimate right now how many additional families would be interested in the virtual program if we were to be looking at expanding it. I mean, we really only know from the families who stayed in post-COVID wanting to continue that based on our cuts. So we will be having that conversation, I think, as we're entering into budget season.
And as we look towards the final document, there's nothing wrong with thinking about kind of qualifying the potential impact of any of these ideas, as part of the recommendation. And it may be a low, we may say this is potentially probably just a low impact, and that'd be fine, but at least it's in there and in the deck.
And there's consistently been state legislation about having to do some kind of virtual program. There was last year, and that was Senator Hester's bill, I think, had one. There's been all kinds of different bills about doing, and I know there will be more this year. So
And the Eastern Shore had a consortium, but
that was,
phased out because it was privatized. But
yes,
yeah,
that was.
I agree with Ms. Gallagher. Why doesn't the state just do that, and then everybody in the state can tap into it?
And that, yes, that's also been broached. I think Montgomery County's legislative package mentioned something about doing a statewide virtual school.
consortium.
or a consortium different, and then 610, Senate Bill 610 does allow for
Yeah.
consortiums, they just have to be public school or nonprofits, yes, so, and you could,
Cost-effective way to do it, because if you look at Frederick County, that it's too expensive to do it for the few that qualify.
yeah, and I know the idea of, the synchronous part of it is what is expensive. Asynchronous would be not as expensive, but the synchronous part where you actually have the teacher, but that is the more effective way that's do. I mean, and kudos for you guys for developing a great program that a section of the population really liked and benefited from, and it really, especially our 504s and our IEP students, really benefited from the
Not only
program.
teachers, it's administrators too.
Yeah, and the administrators and everything else. So that, I mean, yes, certainly that could go in there.
But ironically, it does not meet least restrictive environment.
And that's federal.
Yeah.
I know.
So it's a little bit ironic. That's what we hear from the parents for special education.
It is very ironic.
But it doesn't meet the least restrictive environment that you need for special education. So it's just an interesting situation.
Yeah.
Where it works very well for some of the students, but not for others. Not all. Some of them that are in it, it doesn't work for them.
Okay.
But they do monitor that.
Okay. And then, Councilmember McKay, anything on the audit? We're going back to the unfinished business.
Well, I'm disappointed. I had hoped that Dr. Lebo had covered this for me at the last meeting. I thought I had skirted that one.
No.
I can just make a couple comments on it. So basically, so I sit on the IIA, which is the Interagency Independent Audit Authority, and those two I's I might have flipped. So we chartered an audit of FCPS school construction, and the primary purpose of the audit was to, as are most of our audits, are to look are there adequate control mechanisms in place? Are they following applicable, federal and state regulations, and so on and so forth. We did include a fourth specific, objective in this one, and that's that there had been a number of, as we've seen, committees and working groups that have come out with various recommendations on how to control the cost of school construction. And the question was, are those recommendations, are they being implemented in these actual projects, or, do those papers get published and then sit on a shelf and collect dust? So that was a specific part of the process. And now, the audit wound up being heavily structured around an actual prior cost control recommendation, and that's the model that you use for the project management, and it was the construction management at risk, which was that came from a cost-saving recommendation that FCPS had adopted. I don't know if they're adopting in all of their projects, but one of the comparisons through the audit was looking at, two of those project management styles. And the idea of construction management at risk, and please correct me or add to it, is the notion, and I kind of liken it in my parlance in federal contracting as you're hiring a prime contractor that's giving you a fixed price proposal. In a fixed price proposal, now the contractor is incurring any cost risk rather than the county for things that inadvertently escalate cost. Okay? And so you basically, it's the county now transferring some of that cost risk to the vendor. So anyway, the audit went through, and I think you all were had a link to review it. I just have one copy. I didn't bring copies with me. So they looked at a couple projects, in terms of comparing how that turned out. They looked at comparing some Frederick County projects versus some of the regional and state projects, and looking at our cost per square foot compares to those. And they're challenging comparisons at times because when you're trying to compare in some cases apples and oranges because they're occurring at different times. And that's always one of the challenges in terms of how you compare yourself to other projects, is because time is very significant, in terms of what these things look like cost-wise. So there's always going to be limits there. When it's all said and done, I actually wasn't very satisfied with the audit results on that objective of specifically looking at how various cost-saving measures are being implemented. I would have preferred a more detailed assessment. Here's a set of recommendations from this report, and this is where we can see it reflected here, there, and the other. It didn't get there. After I provided that comment, they wound up adding the last appendix that you'll see, which goes into a little bit more of a discussion, which was fine. But at that point, I figured, well, that's probably all I'm going to get on that topic. That said, it was a very explicit part of the audit to assess the effectiveness of that cost management at risk, model. So that's there. We also see that, FCPS's adoption of that model school, design.
Prototype.
Prototype, thank you. That is also from those, cost-saving recommendations from our report, which is good. And lastly, and I don't know where we're at on this, but the fourth kind of recommendation that came from it was that FCPS would do a kind of an annual it's kind of an annual look at school construction costs, in the area and regionally. And was it kind of a commitment to do that, or was it, we'll seriously look at this recommendation? Because it's not a binding recommendation, on FCPS. But I thought just that the notion of continually, regularly assessing our costs versus our comparables was a positive thing that came out of the audit recommendations.
So to your point on that one, in particular, we have a commitment to look at it, in particular with our next bid cycle. And we already do it, informally. We get SD, DD, and CDS, schematic design, design development, and construction document estimates from our construction manager at risk. We do benchmark that against other LEAs. Is this the site cost you're seeing? Is this the building estimates that you're seeing, to make sure we're not out of alignment? That's not done in a formal process. But secondarily, the state does collect that data through the IAC, and we do get to see that already benchmarked in the information that they have. But we do want to see it in a little more real time, because there's a little bit of a lag in when the state collects the data. And so it will be interesting, because I just talked to Janice about this yesterday. We're seeing a significant increase in our construction document estimates that we have for a project that will go out to bid here soon. And that is in alignment with our design development documents, estimate that we're seeing on another project as well. So it's not inconsistent internally. We've also done a comparison with an adjoining LEA, and they're seeing those same things. So the question would be sort of, would it want a more formal process, and how would that documentation be sort of saved? Because once you do it, the information is really of no value, right? If you see an anomaly, we certainly would want to bring that almost immediately to the board and say, this might be a bid we should reject, because we wouldn't something that's completely misaligned with what the problem right now in this area is the influx, in particular, of federal dollars in the construction world in general, and it is driving prices up almost exponentially.
And I should mention, just more generally in terms of the audit results, I mean, they were generally positive in terms of, those recommendations for improvement, but there weren't any major red flag issues.
No findings, that's what we like, no findings. There were recommendations and areas for improvement, but no findings.
Anyway,
All right.
So, just two quick comments on that. The IC does approve any alternative construction uses by project, and I've been happy to approve all the county's requests for at-risk and all of that recently, because we know you do it right and it'll be successful. We now are rolling out this new business management system online, which is what all the LEA submissions are running through, instead of antiquated old systems and email and all that. We now have an online cloud-based system, and at some point in the next few months, we should be able to put together some kind of dashboard that will give us access to those figures more quickly than the annual spring collection, in order to do the annual update of the construction cost index, right? You may be able to have more of a real time in the coming year. We're heading in that direction. It's a long process to get a new system procured and developed, right? It has to be configured, takes a year to configure, and then rolled out, and everybody used to using it, all of that. So it's in progress, but getting there, getting ways to have more access to that information more quickly. So that should be coming.
Plus you need good Wi-Fi, right?
Yes.
Just another thing to add, Councilmember McKay, is in addition to construction manager at risk, we have performed 2 design build projects as well for additions, and that was another discussion point in there. I think our conversations with the state in particular is we're really looking to find the right delivery method for the correct project, and we are not wed to a specific project or delivery method. We're wed to finding the right delivery method that gets us the most cost-effective and best outcome. And I'll just share that both of those were at Oakdale Middle and then Crestwood Middle. Crestwood Middle was the second school. Even in a tight budget time, we saw very competitive bids, as well as they completed that project about 3 months early. To your point, when you can put some of that risk on, time is money for them, and we got a phenomenal project. They were done before the summer surge, which I don't know their business model, but they do a lot of schoolwork, and so that sort of freed them up to hit other school projects. So that just worked really well, but again, that was a recommendation from the 2017 school construction recommendations as well.
We have found that if you sometimes alter the timeline a little bit enough to make it desirable for these companies when they're bidding these packages, to get that work completed at an off schedule, we get a better bid price.
Because everybody wants to open in August.
Yeah.
Right. So, again, we look at everything. Like, I know that we look at everything.
That's it.
Co-locating schools in Middletown.
Don't even start with me on that one.
This whole project that went up.
Okay, so we'll probably hopefully have some kind of draft format for the next meeting. It's already set on the 21st at 6 p.m. I think that would be our last in-person, and then if we have to do anything in December or to send around the copy to finalize it or anything like that, I say we do it virtually. And that would be it. Is that?
I won't be here on the 21st, I'll be in Seattle.
Okay. Okay.
Here either.
Okay.
I cannot be here too. No,
You're not here on the 21st?
Yeah, but time difference.
I can't.
If that helps anyone else out? Okay, thanks. You're very helpful. Okay.
Well behaved.
Thank you.
Yeah, you guys
As a
did
point of
great.
personal privilege,
All
I
right.
would like to say that you have made my day. I don't get to say this very often, so I feel compelled to let
Oh.
everybody know that you highlighted my day.
Just say it.
This is a little bit different from
My day, the number of bills being limited.
Wow, you don't get that? Can we get that? And that's recorded. That's recorded. Woo!
I I felt compelled to let you know.
I'm just gonna, that's our, forget any more member comments, that's it. Did anyone else have anything? No public comment, we're adjourned. Okay.